In this video, I want to begin setting up the Firearm class so that way we can really just kind of construct it from scratch like we did the character. Now I have two different packs here. So for example, here would be the first one, and I'll bring up the second one. Like so. So the reason I have two of them is because you can see one is pointing forward on the y-axis, one is pointing forward on the x-axis. So there's really not much of a difference in terms of handling the two. You can do them either way, but I want to bring that up just for the sake of one, it'll be a little bit redundant so I can show you, how quickly it is once you know roughly what you're doing to set up a complete firearm. And then I guess any changes or slash differences that there are, just to kind of clear up any confusion. But really once you do one, you've basically done the other. So that's what we're going to do. So let's get our tutorial. We have our, I'm actually drag these. Now I want to do a new folder, call this one tutorial blueprints. And I'm just going to start organizing it. So I'm going to drag my animation stuff in here. And right here in the root, we're just going to do a new blueprint class of type actor. Call this one BP underscore tutorial M4. We're going to add a skeletal mesh. Make it the root. And that's going to be for the, was it like SR, SX, AR? Crap, what was it called? Oh, it's literally just called rifle. Alright, so we're going to use this guy. So there's two of them. There's that, and then there's one without add-ons. I think for the sake, because I know the AK has a ton of attachments, so we're going to do the default. So rifle with iron sights and just set it up from the very base. And then the AK we can go through and we can, that'll be like a attachment tutorial series video, so to speak, where it really kind of shows that area. So we have our mesh. Let's go ahead and add our firearm component. Now if we click on the firearm component, go to initialize, we have the firearm mesh component name. That is going to be our skeletal mesh. So this guy here. And then the attachment manager component name. So as you can see by the comment, the name of the mandatory attachment manager, focus on the word mandatory, meaning we have to add the SKG attachment manager. Now this, there's nothing you really need to worry about, but that'll again be covered in a future video what these do, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Allow client-side modification means you can make changes from the client. That's it. So here we want to do SKG attachment manager. And then we just have firearm collision stuff, which we're not going to touch just yet. But we now have the basics for the firearm. Now, by default, the firearm component acts like an interface to all the other components that you add alongside of it, such as procedural anim components, optic components, so on and so on. So right now this is basically a dead firearm. It doesn't do anything, so to speak, unless you add attachments that have those components. So what we want to do is we want to have some procedural animation. So we're going to add the procedural anim component. Same thing, go to the initialize. Procedural mesh name is going to be skeletal mesh. Then we want to add our aim socket. So by default, we have S underscore aim. That just kind of comes with it. And that's what I have a tendency to name my sockets for aiming anyways. So we're going to go to our root, and a socket, S underscore aim. And I completely missed the gizmo. What I generally do is I'll go to the front sight post and get it pretty much height-wise, like so. Then drag it straight back. Peep sight is, those are not vertically aligned, so that should hopefully be okay. We'll see roughly once we actually aim where we need to adjust this socket. So it's not a big deal for now. Go back to the M4 And we have the procedural gameplay tag. We're not going to touch any of this yet. We're going to just get a very rudimentary, I guess that is the word, firearm set. And then we have all of our procedural settings. So these are going to be what we touch in this video. And really all we want to do now is just get it working. So in our tutorial character, go to the event graph where we have our setup firearm. We're going to change the firearm we're using to the tutorial M4. Compile, save, and hit play. Okay, no assertions. And I look down, we have our M4. You can see the Offhand IK is now back at the root. And when I go to aim, press F8, you can see the firearm. In this case, it's pointing straight down. So we want to orient our socket to kind of counteract that. So we're going to drag it. Let me enable snapping. We're pointing straight down, so we want to adjust the pitch, or in this case, that is going to be our x-axis. If we go to this way, actually, yeah, it is just the x-axis. And rotate it up by 90 degrees. That's just due to how the B_root is oriented. Hit play. And now when we aim, it brings it to the center of our screen. Only thing is, our socket is slightly off. The idle animation does not help. So perhaps we do want to bring this in line with the actual peep sight. So let's aim again. And we're going to go, let's see, that would be, leave up a smidge to bring this front offset. All right, a little higher. And that's pretty darn close. I don't know how well you can see in the video, but can't bring my mouse, but we're basically have the front sight post aligned in the center of the peep sight, or the rear sight. So we are good to go there. Now let's go ahead and correct our left hand. So back in our M4, we're going to search for the Offhand IK. So in this component, like all the others, we have our initialize. So this is going to be our Offhand IK mesh, which is going to be, again, our skeletal mesh. Did I spell that right? That looks way wrong. I don't know why that looks wrong to me. Yeah, I guess that's right. But now we have a left hand IK socket name. So we're going to do S_left hand IK. We're going to copy that. It's just like we did with our S_aim. We're going to add a socket, name it, paste it, and we're just going to get it roughly positioned. So it's just going to be off to the left of the handguard, because remember, this is going to be roughly where the left hand bone, which is in the wrist of the character, is going to be. And the UE4 mannequin is way oversized. Now we have our left hand IK pose. I'll show you what that actually does. So if we hit escape, you can see we're in basically the normal standing idle pose, so the locomotion pose. So the left hand is not using the pose of the, like, holding the firearm. So what we want to do is we want it to have this guy. So we want the left hand to be holding it like this. So idle_rifle_hip. Actually, I can just go to that so I can copy it. So we want to set that to be idle_rifle_hip for the left hand IK pose. Now there is right hand options, but that is for, it's a little bit more complicated, so that'll be in its own thing. But now when I hit play, you can see the left hand is now, actually I got that positioned pretty close, is now performing the correct pose. So what we can do is we can grab our firearm here, and we can adjust it as needed. So I'm going to bring it just in the ballpark, down a smidge, and we have plenty of extra room, so I'm going to move it forwards. Okay, and a little to the left, not sure exactly the direction, and save. So now when we hit play, we now have our left hand position where we wanted, and I think I'm going to go ahead and remove the frames, the additional frames from this animation, because it is really kind of starting to bug me. So I'm just going to right click up here, frame 0, and I'm just going to start removing frames. Okay, you just keep going like that, and you basically have it to where this is a single frame animation. So if I hit play, you can see it's static. Once we have that, create asset, create animation, current pose. Actually, I guess I could have did that. I don't really know if removing the animation or the frames is necessary. But we want to do anim start it back. I guess it just goes in here. I really cannot. I'm just going to put in uniform mannequin. I can't quite remember, but this is going to be the A_tutorial idle animation and hit OK. So here we have that idle animation. And we have IK handgun. We don't even need the curve. It's already positioned. The other bones are way off, but that's not really much of a concern. But now we want to swap this for the, of course, not going to, because tutorial's in the path. So we want to swap it with A_tutorial animation. Copy and save. And same thing in the tutorial M4. We're going to swap that with the A_tutorial animation. Hit play. And now you can see we have a solid pose, and we can take over from there with the procedural animation. So back in the Firearm, go to our procedural animation, and let's go to our movement sway. So by default, we don't have any curves set, so we do have examples, and we're going to use the reference, and I'll cover kind of roughly what they are. So here we have the locomotion sway location and locomotion sway rotation. Simple enough. Compile, save. Now when I aim, you can see we now have the sway curve. We also have the issue of we are going to want to adjust the elbows. So that is a common thing, but I want that to be in a dedicated video because that'll just be in like a 2-minute video. But you can see we now have the sway. So it's no longer just a static 1-frame animation. And this also affects with movement. Of course, jumping is going to rotate it, so we still have the same problem from before. But you can see the more I move, it's really hard to tell with the animations, though. That's going to make it kind of annoying. Let me bypass the locomotion, and we'll just plug it right in. So you can see when I move, that's when the animation starts to really pick up. So backwards, for whatever reason, seems like it rotates the character. Same thing with left and right. I'm not entirely sure why. I wonder if that has something to do with kind of whatever it's built in the anim graph or the event graph. I haven't looked into it enough, but that'll be something I'm going to look into, and I'll just have to resolve that on my own time. So that takes care of our movement stuff. You have settings where you can kind of amplify this and reduce it and such. Now we have our movement lag, and that's going to be by default already set up. So that's like when you go left and right, for example, like left and right, pretend the firearm is not, or the animation is not bugging out. The firearm will roll a little bit to the right, to the left, and kind of lag behind or lead to paste upon, whatever settings you apply in here. Now the rotation settings we can change. So that's what this guy is here. So by default I have it set to where it'll lead with where I'm pointing, but it'll lag behind with up and down some. So leads left and right, lags behind for up and down. You can very easily swap that by just inverting. So for certain axes, so to speak, you have the rotation lag, rotation multiplier. We could just say make 2 of these negative. Okay. You can see now left and right lags behind. So up and down still lags behind. So we're going to swap that. And now up and down leads. So we look up, the firearm points up before we do, but now it lags behind left and right. And to me, that is very unnatural, and I really like the defaults way better. It's just more Call of Duty-like. And same thing with the rotation lag, rotation. So the orientation that the firearm moves, because it also moves when you rotate. Dead zone is going to have to be in its own video, because that uses a additional function inside of here, inside of the character that you have to call basically when your mouse moves. So it kind of handles it alongside your mouse input. So for example, if I search for mouse in the shooter pawn component, we have set mouse input, and then we have our X and Y like so. And that's really all there is, but we're going to set that up in a dedicated video, a very short one. And lastly, our recoil. So this one we can set up really quick just by calling a function. So we're going to search for recoil and curves, and we're going to do one by one. So first one's going to be our control rotation. Compile save, and let's set up our recoil. Well, shooting. So we have right mouse button. We're going to change this, duplicate, and change to left mouse button. But we want to call perform procedural recoil. Now we have multipliers. By default, they're all going to be 1. So you can just pass in your own. But this basically amplifies or reduces the recoil, so you can do it on a per firearm kind of basis. But with just the, I did not mean to close that. With just the control rotation set up, you should be able to see that noticeably. So when I shoot, I think I have it set up to call. Is that firing? Actually, I apologize. You can't do just control rotation. You have to apply the either the location or the rotation with it, because if it's just the control rotation, it stops interpolating immediately. So I was incorrect on that. So we're going to go ahead and actually set the recoil location and the recoil rotation, but these are basically just curves that tell it kind of the shape of the recoil. So when I shoot, you can see now we're firing, and if I aim right at this corner, right on this line, and I start spamming, not moving my mouse, at least I'm not trying to, but you can see it'll gradually climb, and that's the control rotation. So if I remove the control rotation, now there is none, same at the same point, and you can see it's only the firearm that moves around. So taking a look at the graphs, in this case for the recoil, they're all very similar, but it's pretty much just certain axes move different ways. So in the case of the control rotation, the up and down is going to be pretty much the major mover. So if I recall right, this moves the control rotation up, and this moves it down. So we start by moving the camera up and then try to have it settle. So it's really hard to tell with sway, but it moves up a little bit and then it kind of settles back down. And it's a little bit inconsistent with the randomization, so it never lands in the same spot twice. So that's where you can kind of really tweak and fine tune it. So I can make it to where it just continues, to go up. So if I move it down there and save, aim at the same point, now it's climbing a decent bit faster because it's not trying to settle. And same thing is it gets compounded. So what I mean by that is each shot, if the graph doesn't, like let's say you shoot and by the time you reach here, you fire again, you're applying more than you're finishing. So even though it's interpolating back to 0, you're still applying and amplifying more. So here we have way more control, or vertical control rotation. And it's a very similar story for the firearm. So here we have the recoil rotation. This is for the firearm itself. And again, it's just I don't know how to describe it. If I recall right, I think X in this case is the roll. I believe Y is the pitch. And Z, which one is Z? I can't honestly remember, but when you go through and you play around with it, you kind of pick up, oh, this axis does this one does this, and this one does this, and it becomes pretty straightforward. But that's pretty much the bulk of it. So you do have your randomness for each axis for everything, as well as how fast it's going to want to interpolate itself back to nothing. So how fast is it going to want to blend itself basically out of the recoil curve. Then lastly, we have our pose settings. So this is our poses such as high port, low port, short stock, so on and so on. We're going to cover that again, separate video, because that's like its own dedicated topic. But for the most part, we now have our firearm set up. So In the next video, the main thing I want to focus on, I want to start doing a couple short ones, is we're going to cover setting up the dead zone aiming. So that is something that is dirt simple. So it'll just be a couple minutes, and I'll see you then.